Hey there, and welcome to another small showcase. I'm AmzroSevca, and today we'll be taking a look at a few new details of our projects I've built or contributed to over the years. In this first segment, I'll be sharing a little bit more about what inspired one of my largest projects, Sonic XS. It is a reimagining of the classic era of the Sonic franchise that involves converting a whole host of locales from various titles into the traditional 16-bit 2D platformer style that the mainline titles of the early 90s were known for. One of the most notable aspects of the project is that it has all of its locations located on one giant island known as Protometra. The inspiration for this element came largely from a discussion I had with a friend of mine back in the early 2010s, where he hypothesized, as with several others who were quite into the classic Sonic games, that many of the zones seen in the early titles were meant to originally all be part of a single island. This idea intrigued me, and the rationale behind it didn't seem too far-fetched. Some of the primary arguments go something like this. First, Green Hill Zone has a noticeable amount of clones. While it is not unheard of for many games to have a shared quote-unquote first world aesthetic that gives a sense of familiarity, some of the set pieces, geography, and art style choices seen in Green Grove, Emerald Hill, Palm Tree Panic, and others look awfully close to where one could mistake them as being set in the same exact location. If we take a quick look here at this chart I put together, you can actually see there's a lot of elements, like I said before, that really overlap in these different iterations of these Green Hill Zone clones. Like if we look over about 4 over from the left on the bottom row at Green Grove Zone, where you can kind of see like the Play-Doh looking waterfall. You look at the zone right above it, which is Palm Tree Panic Zone. You can see these bushes that have this sort of like star-like shape. And then there's even other elements, such as, you know, if you look at Emerald Hill Zone, which is the second of the top row from the left, then you look at the zone right next to it, which is Green Hills from Sonic 2 8-bit, you can obviously see that there's been, you know, some repetition in the way that ground blocks are patterned, or, you know, the kind of pseudo 3D aesthetic that can be found between some of the ground pieces, or even maybe in the way that grass is styled. You know, like if you look between Azure Lake from Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which is all the way 5th on the top row, and then there's obviously going to be Palm Tree Panic right next to it, that 4th one, where you have like this sort of hashing in the grass that also is shared a little bit too by Sonic Triple Trouble's Great Turquoise Zone, which is going to be the 5th from the left on the bottom row. And so like a lot of these, you know, aesthetic design choices, there's a sort of a repeated design language here, you know, and the art style is very familiar with all of them, where again you could kind of argue that maybe they actually all do exist in the same locale. And obviously, you know, it's probably pretty apparent to any individual that Green Hills Zone would exist in the same location as Green Hill Zone from Sonic 1, which is up there in the top left. And then Emerald Hill is no stranger with its, you know, again, very Green Hill. Actually, to put this in a more explicit way, one could argue that Emerald Hill Zone was basically supposed to be Sonic 2's homage directly to Green Hill, just in the way that the grass is striped, which is even some of the patterning, like the what do you call it, the way that the grass kind of goes up and down in its formation of colors is again almost indistinguishable from the way that it's done in Green Hill Zone Sonic 1. So again, you kind of start to see a lot of these familiar, you know, patterns, pieces. Again, like, you know, the checkered ground, you know, in Green Grove, or for, you know, look at Great Turquoise, or even the Turquoise Zone from Sonic Chaos, you know, there on the bottom row. You can see that a lot of, again, these design elements and, you know, this similar form of the design language is repeated throughout all these iterations. Second, zones that were scrapped from the island of one title were often realized in the next title over. This can be seen with the Hidden Palace Zone from Sonic 2 being officially presented in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles getting a desert, forest, and snow level. These were all level themes that got scrapped during Sonic 2's development cycle. The Hidden Palace was also going to play a similar role in Sonic 2 to what its role ended up being in Sonic 3, with it being home to a giant emerald and all. Third, all 4 of the islands seen between Sonic 1 through 3 and Knuckles and 3D Blast share almost the same exact backstories beat for beat, with 3D Blast being the most vague in details. All the islands are stated to have been home to ancient civilizations that had contact with the Chaos Emeralds. One can make the case that maybe the Chaos Emeralds love just jumping between islands or something, but it makes a lot more sense that all these islands that were home to ancient architecture and civilizations that had connection with the Chaos Emeralds were at some point supposed to just be the same island. Now, of course, to my knowledge, there's no definitive proof that all these islands were supposed to be the same one. However, with games sharing similar backstories and development ideas such as Sonic 2 and Sonic City before they gained their own distinct identities in production, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that all the locations were going to originally just be different parts of a single island or continental landmass. With that theory covered, let's take a look at something a little different. Here are some of the development materials that I produced for SEGA Genesis ROM hack that some of you may have heard before. Originally known as Sonic the Hedgehog Ultimate Rebirth, Sonic the Hedgehog Isle of Magnetic Artifacts is a complete overhaul of Sonic 1 that pulls on various elements of Japanese art and design aesthetics. I was largely involved with the project in its earliest months of development and was in charge of constructing the story and a progression skeleton for gameplay and narrative sequences. This included details such as zone names, zone progression, boss concepts, world map concepts, and a few other attributes bundled with visual sketches. In addition to working on the story and making a few additions to the game design document, I also contributed to the development of zones. This was primarily in the form of mapping ideas, level art concepts, and testing various methods of constructing a level from the ground up. While I'm not exactly sure what the original pitch for the level flow was, I do remember experimenting with the idea of creating a sort of level architecture that would be a blend of Sonic CD and Sonic Rush. How this would have turned out, I honestly don't know, and it would have been incredibly difficult to implement in a SEGA Genesis game considering how path swapping and layers work with classic Sonic games. One of the fellow developers on the team pointed out how building levels out of pre-drawn skeletons that had ambitious wayfinding would end up creating massive roadblocks down the line, and so I switched back to just building out levels by individual blocks, which is largely how level design goes in ROM hacking Sonic Genesis games. The level you see scrolling in the background here is an early version of Blossom Garden Zone. Just as with most of these levels I'll be showcasing here, it is made up of sprite work from various Sonic games with the custom block pieces or edited elements added in. The idea was just to get some sort of visual representation going, so it was far from ideal. Thankfully, the newer iterations of the project are home to more original level art, which is to be expected since, again, what I'm showing you here was made in the earliest parts of the game's alpha stage. This next stage is an early prototype of Chili Capacitor Zone that was supposed to be the second zone of the game where Sonic travels up from the open plains of the Cherry Field region and to the cold Crush mountain range. The level is supposed to have a sort of mountain industrial aesthetic, wrapped in a blizzard that would progressively worsen as the acts went along. Now this third stage, Cyber Coast Zone, was scrapped early on in development during the writing process. It was one of the two stages alongside Thunder Complex Zone that were scrapped prior to any world building being properly established. The Cyber Coast Zone is one of the roughest concepts by far and was done in a week or so since I was simply curious about the visual concept of a metropolitan tropical coastline backdropped by snowy mountain peaks, which went on to inform the ideal for Chili Capacitor and Cold Crush mountain range. After being scrapped from the project, it was moved to Sonic Deluxe, a mock-up project I was making in my own time, before ultimately it was permanently shelved along with Sonic Deluxe and all of its contents. The last stage that I have to show here is Thunder Complex Zone. This is easily one of my favorite pieces of sprite art that I've ever put together, even though it's just an amalgamation of level art from other classic Sonic games remixed together. The idea was to have this sort of floating factory warship where a vicious league of robots and other dangerous weaponry was being developed by Dr. Eggman. They would have been kept in these UFO capsules that have boardwalks reminiscent of the Death Star from Star Wars Episode 4 and the Theed power generator from Star Wars Episode 1. The boardwalks in this prototype were ripped straight from Donkey Kong Country for clarification. The capsules would freely float up and down in this massive production chamber where clouds would roll in as the factory warship moves about in the atmosphere. The inspiration for the stage largely came from a dream concept I had about a Sonic 3 expansion that would have featured a reworked Sandopolis zone and a level similar to the Fury Fortress zone that appeared in the Sonic 3 ROM hack Sonic 3 Resort Island. Some of the visual design ideas also came from titles in the Mega Man X and Mega Man Zero series, taking inspiration from stages such as X1's Spark Mandrill, X2's Hunter Base, and X3's Doppler Lab, just to name a few. With those zones having been shown, that about wraps up the details of my involvement with Sonic the Hedgehog Isle of the Magnetic Artifacts. By the time I had left the project, which was after a few months during the summer of 2021, the game either was pending a title change from Sonic the Hedgehog Ultimate Rebirth to Sonic the Hedgehog Isle of the Magnetic Artifacts, or had already underwent the change and I became a playtester for some of the early internal builds before completely ceasing involvement as other obligations and priorities had arisen in my life. To wrap things up, I'll be showing you all one of my last major Sonic focused projects, which was an online community I constructed in the lead up to the release of Sonic Origins. It was going to be a game modding and content creation hub for the game where players could find collections of ripped assets, discuss modding the game or porting content into it from other titles, share speedruns, and other novelties. Unfortunately, the community was permanently closed after a few months as the game did not gain as much traction as initially expected, and upkeep of the community became more demanding with little progress being made overall.